In this section, let's actually deploy the Forkify project to a live server. Or, as we can also say, we will host the application on the internet to share it with everyone. And we will do deployment using an amazing and free service called Netlify. Then we will also learn the fundamentals of Git, which is a version control software. And Git is something that every professional developer uses. So you will definitely need Git on your first development job, and so it's a good idea to learn it. So let's now manually deploy the Forkify project to an amazing and free hosting service called Netlify. But before we can do that, we now need to create the final bundle of our application by running this build command. So up until this point, we have always used the start command here, but that only works for development because the final output will actually contain the development server, and also the code is not being compressed and that code is not being eliminated while in development. All right, so let's open up our terminal. And so here we still have our start command running. And so let's finish that now by hitting Command C, or actually Control C. And alternatively, you can also simply kill this terminal by clicking this button here. All right. So right now we no longer have our development server running, and Parcel is now no longer automatically creating the build as we save our application. And so now we are ready to run this build command. But before, let's actually delete this Parcel cache folder and or dist folder as well. So I like to delete these in order to basically get a fresh start. Now this build command here is actually not yet complete, because in the build command we actually need to manually specify that we want our output to be here in the dist folder. Okay, and so if you're on version 2 of Parcel, like I am, okay, so in that case, specify the dist dir option. So --dist dir, which stands for distribution directory, basically, and then we need to specify the folder that we actually want to be created. And so just like before, let's call that the dist folder. Now, what's also very important is that here we need to change from main to default. So very important, otherwise this build command will not run in Parcel 2. So again, change this main here to default. And I believe that this is actually because of some bug that currently happens in the beta 1 version of Parcel 2. But never mind, with that, we actually fixed that problem. Now, if you are using Parcel 1 for some reason, then here instead of dist directory, it is called out directory. So like this. But again, that is only if you are on version 1 of Parcel. And so now this command here is ready for us to execute it. So npm run build, and then let's wait for it. So as always, it takes some time here, but when it's done, we are ready to then deploy the folder that was just created to our Netlify service. And here it is. And now it contains the final code compressed and ready to be shipped. Okay? Now, if you got any error during this build process while you're using Parcel 2, then please make sure that you really set this default here. And also make sure that everything here is correctly spelled like this. But if the problem still persists, then it might be a good idea to downgrade to Parcel 1. And so you would do that with npm uninstall like this. And then after that, you would install it again at version 1 like this. And so that should then work. And remember that in that case, here it is out, dir, and not dist. And also, you would have to go to all your views and change the way you import the icons. So you would have to remove this part here. Okay, so wherever you import the icons, if you're using parcel 1, remember you have to take out this part. Okay, but then after everything is done, and once you have this dist folder, we are ready to go to Netlify and actually deploy this. So let's go back to our browser, and here I already have netlify.com open. Now, Netlify is a free service that lets us developers basically deploy static web pages or static web applications. And with static, we mean that the application only contains HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files, as well as some images, but no database or no server-side code at all. All right? So basically, Netlify only works for front-end applications like the one that we just built. So Netlify is really an amazing service. It's extremely easy to set up and to use. It has a very generous free plan, and it contains a lot of great features that you can also use for free. And one of these features is called continuous integration with Git, which we will use a bit later in the section. And I'm telling you all these great things about Netlify, not because I'm sponsored by them, not by any means. It's simply because I really, really love this service. It's just fantastic. Now, if you need something even more simple, without even having to open an account, you can also use this search service, which is also free, and it's even easier. So here you don't have to create an account, and you can simply npm install search on your computer, and then once you're in the folder you want to publish, so you want to deploy, all you have to do is to run the search command. But anyway, we will now use Netlify in this section, and so if I convinced you that it's worth using it, then please go ahead now and sign up for your free account. Now, of course, I already have my account, and so I will wait here until you're ready. Okay, and so this is how it should look like once you log in into your Netlify account. Now, it might have changed some time after I recorded this video, but in general, this should be kind of what it looks like. So you see, I already have a lot of sites here. So basically, that's all the demo projects that I have been showing you. And so, again, for that, I use Netlify because it's so easy. And speaking of easy, let me now show you how easy it actually is to quickly and manually deploy or forkify a project. So let's go to our project folder here. So this one right here. And then we take the dist folder, because that's the folder that we want to deploy. So our build that we just created. And then we take that folder and we simply drag and drop it here into the interface and drop it there. And that's it. Our page is now deployed. So you see how easy that was. So we get this page here with this random name that we can click on, and this is our web page, and now everyone can see it. So it's now in fact deployed on this live server on this URL. Now this is not ideal though, so this random URL, and so we can click here on site settings and change the name of our site. So come down here and then change site name. Okay, and so I'm calling this Forkify-Jonas. And you can then go ahead and call yours Forkify and then with your name. And of course, this name has to be unique, and so just make sure that you're using some unique name. All right, now we can click here again, and now our domain name here makes a bit more sense. All right, and that's actually it. So this is how easy it really is. But the great thing about Netlify is not only that it's easy, but as I mentioned before, also some of the great features. And one of them is that automatically our page is now secured with an SSL certificate. So if we check out the URL, you see that it actually is HTTPS, right? And all of that is automatically included for free in our account. And another thing that's great is that all our site assets, so all the files that we just deployed, were in fact deployed to a so-called Content Delivery Network, or CDN. And that means that instead of uploading the files only to one server in one location in the world, our site now actually lives in many locations, so in many servers spread out across the entire world. And so then when a user is trying to access our page, they will then get the version from the server that is closest to them. And so this will then greatly speed up the delivery time of your page or your application. So again, a lot of great features, really easy to use. And yeah, that's why I recommend Netlify to everyone. And I'm demonstrating all this using the Forkify project, but of course, it will work the exact same way for any other project that you might want to deploy. So as long as it is a static project, this is how it works. But anyway, this is how we deploy a project manually to Netlify. However, there's also a better way. So basically a way which allows us to automate the process of deploying the application. And for that, we will need something called version control and Git. And so let's take a look at that in the next video. So we manually deployed our project to Netlify, which is already great, of course, but we can do a lot better. Because we as web developers don't like to do things manually. So we like to automate things, and so that's where Git comes into play. So in this lecture, we're gonna install and set up Git on your computer and also open a free account at github.com. Now, if you're already familiar with Git and GitHub, then please mark this video and the next ones as completed, and then simply move on to the video where we actually deploy the project to Netlify using GitHub. Okay, so let's start by opening up the Git website. So that's going to be Git SCM. And so this is where we will download Git from. So Git is version control, as it says right here. So it is a software that runs on your computer, and you can basically use Git to save snapshots of your code over time. And then if you need, you can go back in time, like to older versions of your code, if you need to recover some mistake, for example. And that is really just a tip of the iceberg of everything that you can do with Git. But anyway, let's now download this software and then install it. So probably the easiest way of doing it is to click here on this installer for your operating system. So find this installer here somewhere on your page. So if you're on Windows, probably this looks different, but somewhere you will find a link for an installer, and then simply download that and install it on your computer. Of course, I already have Git, and so I will wait for you to finish your installation. Okay, so I hope you successfully installed Git on your computer, and so let's now go back to our code and start a so-called repository. So let's clear the console here, and then make sure that in your terminal you are in the project folder. So here in this Forkify folder, and not inside of any of these child folders. So really the parent folder where your entire application lives. And so now we can write git init, hit enter, and so here you see we initialized an empty Git repository in this folder here. Then I get this warning here which asks me if I would like to add node modules to git ignore, And if you get the same warning, then please click yes. But if you don't, then never mind. We will talk about that in the next video. For now, what matters here is that you understand that basically a repository, or as we also call it, a repo, is the fundamental concept of Git. So right now in this Forkify folder, we created a local repository which will eventually contain all of our code here. So all this code, which is right now marked in this orange color. So you see that changed as soon as we initialized this Git repository. So that means that there is actually a very tight integration between Git and VS Code. And that is because really all software developers work with Git. So everyone needs these features, and therefore VS Code has this very tight integration. Now, right now, none of these files are already in our repository, but for now, we will actually not add them. So I will leave that for the next lecture, because in this one, all I wanted to do is to configure Git and also to open an account on GitHub next. And so let's actually go do that. So let's search for GitHub. And so then it's github.com. Now we need GitHub or any other service that is similar to GitHub in order to basically store our local repository in the cloud. So eventually, of course, we will have some code here in this repository. And then we will want to save that repository online. So for example, that we can switch between computers or that we can make sure that our code never gets lost. And so for that, we need an account on some service like GitHub. And there's also GitLab or I think Gitbucket or something like that. But GitHub is by far the most popular one. And so let's open up an account here in case you don't have one yet. Okay, and this is probably how GitHub will look like for you after you log in. But for now, that's not so important. Again, we will start working with it in the next lecture. For now, what I want to do here is to basically connect your local Git installation with your GitHub account. And so let's do some configuration here. So we type Git. And by the way, as you see, Git is basically a command line interface from which we can use this software and really do all kinds of stuff. Now, there are also some graphical user interfaces for Git, which many people that don't like the command line prefer. But actually, in my opinion, I think that it's easier to use Git on the command line. All right. But anyway, what I want to do now here is git config and then the option of global. And so this will then work in all the repos you ever create on your computer. And then user.name. And then set this to your username that you just chose on GitHub. So for me, that would be like Jonas Schmettmann or something like that. So do this. So write your username and then hit enter, which I will not do. And then write the same thing again. So git config global user and this one email. And then here specify the email that you used on GitHub. And so with this, it will then become a lot easier to basically connect your local repositories with GitHub. Okay? And that's actually it for this setup video. In the next lecture, we will then actually start using Git. And after this 3-part intro to Git, so after this lecture and the next 2 ones, you will be able to start using Git in your own projects. And that's actually really important. So you really need to start using Git because you will use Git in every web development job that you will ever find. So every developer uses Git and also GitHub every single day. Let's now quickly go over the basics of Git. And this video is by no means going to be a complete overview of Git. All I want to do here is to get you started as quick as possible with Git so that we can then push our project to GitHub. All right. Now, before we can do anything else with Git, in each repository, we should have a git ignore file like this. So if VS Code didn't create it automatically for you, as it did for me in the last lecture, then please go ahead and create this file right now. So it starts with a dot and then git ignore. And inside of this file, we can put all the folders and also files which we want Git to ignore. Or in other words, folders and files that we do not want to get into our repository. And node modules is a perfect example of that because, well, we can always get this code back from npm, right? It is not part of our original source code. And so therefore, we don't need it in our Git repository. And actually, the same is true for our dist folder, right? So the dist folder essentially only contains code that was built from our source code. And so, again, this is actually code that we do not need in our Git repository. So usually in the repository, we only want like the original source code and everything that is necessary in order to basically compile our final project later. So let's actually also exclude the dist folder here. Now, this is not mandatory, and some people want also to keep their dist folder in the Git repository. But personally, I think it's a good idea not to include it. And so you see that now it got grayed out here as well. And the same for the parcel cache folder. So that we also don't want. So .parcel cache. So that's gone now. And now here VS Code shows us that there are basically 28 files in our repository that are pending changes. So this here is enough for our git ignore. Now only if you're using the Mac, you can add one type of file here, which is the .ds store, which is some kind of weird file that macOS sometimes adds to our directories. But with this here, I think we're already at a good starting point. Okay? So let's now run a git command called git status. And so this shows us here that all of these files are untracked files. And we can also see that we are on branch master and that there are no commits yet. So all of these files here are untracked. And so now we need to track them, which in terms of Git means to add them to the so-called staging area. So you can also see here in VS Code that these files are now untracked. So that's what this U stands for. Okay, but now let's add all these files to the staging area by saying git add and then -a, which stands for all the files. Now we could also add files manually, so one by one, but usually that's never necessary. So I will simply add all of my files now. And so these files are now basically part of the repository. Okay, and so now here it says added. And so these files are now basically tracked. They are active. Okay, then let's say we do some change in one of them. Let's say in the controller, let's just log something to the console in the init function. Let's say welcome. And so now you see that this file was modified, right? And also immediately here on the sidebar, VS Code shows us that something has changed. And so green here means that something was added. And when we click that, we can then actually see the change. So the plus here means that something was added. And if we see get status now again, you will see that all of these files here are ready to be committed. So they are being tracked. And then there's this modified file. And so in order to now commit all these files to our Git repository, I need to run git add all again. So now you see that it is back to just being added. And also this green bar here is gone. All right. And so now we're ready to finally commit these files. And committing the files basically means that we really save the modifications of all the files to the repository. So adding the files like this here is basically just a pre-step before the commit. So a commit is going to be like a snapshot of your code at a certain point in time. So each time before you make some significant changes to your code base, you should always commit. And so then, if necessary, you can go back to past commits and delete any modifications that you did that were maybe wrong. And we will see how to do that actually later in this lecture. But for now, let's commit what we already have here. So git commit, then -m, which stands for message, and then here we need to specify a string, which is the commit message. And so usually the first commit is always going to be called initial commit like this. Okay, and that's it. Now they're all committed, and you see that all the files now look normal here again. All right, and if we now take a look again at git status, then you will see that there's nothing to commit and the working tree is clean. All right, so in summary, whenever we initialize a new Git repository, usually I immediately add all the files. So I do git init, then after that, immediately I run this command, so git add all the files, and then immediately after that, I commit everything as the initial commit. All right. Now let's say that we do some modifications here in multiple files, but we actually introduce some kind of a bug. Not writing any real code, I will just put bug here now, and it turns red because I have a special VS Code extension for that. And let's say I also have now some error here in the model. Okay, and so this is just to simulate that we introduced some real bugs. So if you wanted to go back on all of these files to the previous commit, then you could simply write git reset, then -- hard, and then here head, all in uppercase like this. And now watch what happens to this file as this command is executed. So you see that it's gone. And the two files here that previously had the M for modified are also now back to normal, and the bug that we introduced here is also gone. All right, and so this is the easiest way to going back in time, basically to the previous commit. But now let's say that you actually had already committed. So let's say that here you now had an alert which says hacked, and it doesn't really matter what code it is, but let's say this is another bug that you introduced for some reason, but you didn't really notice that it was happening. So let's say here as well. All right, so you see now these two files are modified, and now you want to commit these changes. So you think you added a great new feature, but actually you just introduced a bug which allows users to get hacked. But anyway, you don't know that yet, let's say, and so you add all the files to the staging area, and then you do git commit with the message of new feature. Okay, and so now these modified here are gone, and our code is now committed. Now let's say you keep working on the code, but eventually you notice that you have these bugs here which allow users to get hacked. And so you want to basically now delete the last commit that you did, right? So you want to go back to the previous commit. So to do that, you need to take a look at that previous commit, and you can do git log for that. And so here you have basically a log of all the commits that you did. So this one is the last one. So the new feature, and it has basically this ID here. And so this has currently the head, And so that's why previously we could reset using this head keyword. But now you want to go back to this commit, so to the initial commit, right? And so let's copy this ID here basically, and it would be enough to take the last 7 here, but I like to simply copy everything. So select and copy. And now to get out of this log here, you need to type a Q. So Q for quit. Okay, so Control C will not work there. You have to use key like this. And sometimes you even need like colon and Q. But anyway, let's now do again git reset hard and then the ID of that commit. So let's see. And now that hacked log is gone from here and from here as well. And so we are now back in that initial commit. And indeed, that's what is said right here. So the head is now at the initial commit. However, moving between commits like this is a little bit dangerous. And so instead, when we plan of doing a lot of changes, usually we simply create a new branch. So let's write git branch, and this will simply list all the branches that we currently have. And so right now we only have the master branch, and this star here means that that's the branch that we are currently in. And now again, to close this, you need to write a Q. Okay, but now let's create a new branch. And so that new branch is then basically going to be a copy of the current master branch in which we can develop new code and adding new features, but without affecting the code that is in the master branch. So it's basically a parallel track in which we can develop new code, but without affecting the original code that we had before and which we knew was already working. And so this is a great way of preventing bugs in our main code base. So we create a new branch by writing again git branch, but then here we can also specify now the name of the branch. So let's call this one new feature. Okay, so we created a new branch, but we didn't switch to that new branch yet. So to switch to that branch, we write git checkout and then the name of the branch. And so it says switched to branch new feature. So let's quickly add some modifications here. Let's add a new function. New feature is simply a function which logs to the console, welcome to the application. Okay. And we also delete this code from here, and then we want to call that function down here. So nothing significant. This is again just to simulate. So this one turned now green because we changed something from the original code, and here it is orange because we changed something. And if we were to delete something, for example, then it should turn red, which right now is not happening. But anyway, if we click here, we can see exactly what the code looked like before. So these 2 lines of code are gone, and this one is new. And so this in itself can be very handy and a great use case of Git. But anyway, let's put this very important line here back. Okay, and so let's now add this change to the staging area. So git add all. So we always have to do this before committing, and then git commit message, then edit new welcome feature. All right, and that's it. So we just created a new feature, but this new feature is now in this new feature brand. So let's check that out again. So git branch. And so now we have these 2 branches. So master and new feature, and this one is the current one. Then again Q to exit this. And now, once we are done with this new imaginary feature, let's switch back to the master branch so that we can then integrate these changes into our main code base. So, which again is in the master branch. So that is git, checkout, and master. And so now, as I execute this, you will see this code here going away, because that is the way the code looked like in the master branch. Okay? And so this proves that there are now really like two different tracks with different versions of the code. So in the master branch, we have this code, and in the other branch, we have that code that we just saw and that just disappeared. But now we can then merge these changes together. So when we are in the branch into which we want to add the new code, we can use git merge and then the name of the branch which contains the new code that we want to merge with the current branch. And so that is the new feature branch. And so now watch what happens here. Okay, so you see that this code here was just added. And down here is also this small summary. So you see there were 6 modifications, 5 additions, so 5 lines were added, and 1 line was deleted. And now just to make sure that our working tree is still clean, so that we don't have to commit anything, let's again watch git status. And you see there's nothing to commit, the working tree is clean. And so the code that we have in this branch, so in the master branch, is now the same as in the new feature branch. Okay, so this is a great feature to basically build code, but without affecting our original code, which might break with the changes that we are introducing. And so usually we never work in the master branch and simply add features in a different new branch. And then once we're done, we merge these two branches together. And then if there is some error or something not working, we can always go back to what it was before. All right. And that's all I had to show you in this short introduction to Git. And if you want to learn even more, or maybe have all of these commands that I just showed you in one nice overview, there's actually a very handy cheat sheet for Git that was developed by GitHub, which I really like to use. So let's search for GitHub Git cheat sheet. Okay, and this one is probably it. This one looks a bit different than the one I mean. Yeah, this is the one that I have. And I actually, when I first found this, I even printed this out and put it on my desk, because there's a lot of stuff that we can do. So here is what I just showed you with the branches, right? Then here is git status, git add, git init, and yeah, also git reset hard. And so you see there is a lot of stuff that we can do. And in the next video, we will then actually use these commands here. So git push and git pull, so that we can basically copy our local repository onto a repository that lives in the cloud on GitHub. And this will then allow us to basically keep a backup of our repository online, and it will also enable us to automatically deploy our site from this repository by setting up continuous integration on Netlify. And so let's learn how to do that, so how to push our code to GitHub right in the next lecture. So in this video, we're going to put all our code onto GitHub, or as we usually say, we're going to push our code to a remote branch, so that we can then set up the continuous integration feature that I talked about before in the next video. And so now here on GitHub, let's click on this plus button here and create a new repository. Or we could also click right here. So there are going to be multiple ways of creating a new repository, because that's basically the most important feature on GitHub. All right. Then here, the first thing is that we need to give the repository a name, and I'm going to call it Forkify course video, just so that I know exactly what this repository is about. So I like to be really descriptive here. Then I'm going to make it private, and so with this, no one else can see this repository. Then down here, we have the option to add a README and a git ignore, but we don't want to do that. Okay, so if we added a README right now, then we would create a conflict later on when we import our code. So actually that's what it's saying here right now. So skip this step if you're importing an existing repository. And so that's what we will do next. So then click on creating repository. And so here we are. Okay, so this here is the URL basically of our Git repository. But what matters here is that now there are these two scenarios. So there is the scenario that we don't have a repository yet. So I mean a local one, but that's not the case. So we already have the repository that we have been working on. And so what we want to do now is to push that existing repository to this online repository. So to this remote repository that we just created here. And so in order to connect these two, we need to copy this line of code and execute it in our local repository. So let's go back, clear this here, and then paste it and execute it. And so what this did here was to add a remote branch, which is called origin. All right. And the URL of that remote branch is called this one here. So again, with this, we basically let our local repository know about this remote repository right here. And if we check out our branches now, then that origin branch might actually be there. And I'm not sure if it is, but let's check that out. So git branch, and it actually doesn't say here, but that doesn't really matter. So this was just to check. But what matters is that we can now push code to this remote branch, which remember is called origin. And so the way we do that is by writing git push and then the name of the remote branch, which is called origin. So that's right here. And of course, you could give this one another name, but origin is simply the standard name. So that's what everyone uses. So git push origin and then the name of the branch that you want to push. And so let's say that we only want to push the master branch. So hit enter, and then you will see that it's going to do some work here. And now it's done. Okay, and so now if we go to GitHub and reload our repository here, then our code is there. All right, great. So we successfully pushed our local repository into this remote repository. And so now if we would work on any other computer, we could go ahead and take our code out of this repository. And you see that indeed all our code is here, at least all the code that we did not add to the git ignore file. So that's why you only have the source here now, but not the dist and node modules folders. But everything else is of course here. So our index, HTML, and all our source codes. And you can see here also the commit messages that we had, and you can see the branches. So right now we only have the master branch, but if we really wanted to keep that other branch as well in our remote repository, then we can simply call this again. And so git push origin and then the name of that other branch, which was called new feature. All right. So this looks a bit different, But let's see. Let's reload. And then here it is. All right. But anyway, let's now add a README file, which is a common thing that all GitHub repositories should have. So it's basically a file that appears down here with a description of the project. So let's come here, or actually let's do it from here. So touch readme.md, and so we can use our command line skills a little bit. So here it is. And now to add a title to any MD file. So MD stands for Markdown. And so Markdown is like a special typing format that we can use to write simple documents. And so let's give this here a name of Forkify project. And then an empty line. And then here we can add some description text. Let's say a recipe application with custom recipe uploads. And so you can write whatever description you want here. I just want to keep it really short here. And now let's go through the same process as before so that we can also upload this file. So basically upload this modification to our remote repository as well. So as always, we need to start by adding this new file to the staging area. Then we need to commit it. So git commit message, and then here a nice descriptive message. So added the readme, and then git push origin master. So let's wait for it. And now if we come here, you see that we had 26 minutes ago, we had 2 commits, and this here is the latest commit message. And now as we reload this, then you see we now have 3 commits. This is the latest commit message. And indeed, down here now appears this description that we just added. Great. Now, if you wanted to now start working on another computer, you could simply go to this button here, copy this URL, and then do the opposite, which is pull. Okay? Now, many times when we create a new repository, we actually do it the other way around. So we start with a new repository on GitHub, then we give it a name, and then we actually add a README here and also a git ignore. Then we create that repository, and then we pull that repo onto our computer. And so this then actually automatically connects the local repository with the remote one. And so that makes things a little bit easier. So a lot of times I do it like this, but in this case, we already had the local repository with all our code. And so therefore, we needed to create this repository really empty. So just the way that we did it. Okay? But anyway, let's go back here to our remote Git repository now, so that in the next video, we can finally set up the continuous integration feature with Netlify. All right, so let's now finally set up the continuous integration with Netlify. And to do that, let's go back to our Netlify dashboard. So right here, and we are still here in the settings part of this site. Okay, and so then let's go here to build and deploy. And then from here, we can choose the option link site to Git. All right. Now we could also do this right from the beginning like this. So without the manual deploy that we did in the beginning. So that would be like in the very beginning, we could simply create new site from Git. But in this case, we already have this site. And so we can now simply change this here to continuous integration. Now, in a nutshell, what continuous integration means, or continuous deployment, as Netlify apparently calls it, That basically is to connect a site to a Git repository, and then whenever we change the code in our repository, then that will automatically trigger a new deployment of our site. And so then everything happens really automatically. So all we will have to do then is to basically build our code locally, commit it to our Git repository, then push that Git repository to our remote repository on GitHub, and then from there, the site will automatically be built and deployed. So let me show you how that works. So link site to Git. Then here we can select the Git provider that we want. And so as I mentioned before, there are actually more services beside GitHub, like GitLab and Bitbucket, but we will use GitHub, of course. Then here we have to authorize the access to GitHub, which in my case here was already done, but you will probably have to authenticate yourself again. And then here we have all the repos that I have in my GitHub account. And so let's now search for Forkify. Okay, and so this here is the one that I just created previously. So Forkify course video is exactly this one that we created in the last video, right? And of course, yours will have to have a different name, but simply select that one then right here. All right. Then we can change which branch we want to deploy. And so we have these two, right? But of course, we want the master branch. But now here comes the question. So where is the code that we actually want to deploy, right? Because remember, the code that we do want to deploy is in the dist folder of our code. So if you go back here, the code that we manually deployed before was this dist folder. However, this dist folder is not in our repository, right? But that's not a problem at all, because we can now tell Netlify here to run our build command whenever there is a change in the repository. And so this is really, really powerful. So let's come here to our package.json, and our build command is this one. And so here, let's just copy this build command. And so Netlify will then basically install all these dependencies and also these dev dependencies and run this command. Okay, so basically what we did manually also on our local computer, Netlify will do it for us. Okay, and then finally the publish directory. And so that is our dist folder. So this is where the code will live after this build command is executed, right? And now let's hope that everything works here, because it's not always that smooth. But let's see. And it is starting up here. So let's wait what happens. So we can also click on the details here. And you see that it is doing something. So it's installing the npm modules apparently. Now it's building all of our assets here. So this is growing really fast. It's not really important also. What matters is that our build command was apparently understood. So it's doing all of this stuff. And here we get now the exact same message that we got previously also offline. So also on our local computer, right? So where is that? Yeah, so this one here. So it's exactly what we got before, right? And so then Netlify build was complete and the site is live. Okay, so let's reload here. And everything works. And remember that our current site right now has in the controller this welcome to the application. And so in order to see if everything really worked, that should now be in the console. And bam! there it is. Great. So everything worked just smoothly, and I hope that it did the same for you as well. So let's go back here, and here you now get this published tag. And also, I think that on GitHub, you can see that if you reload. Well, usually it says something here on the right side, like that it was deployed on Netlify. But in this case, it doesn't happen, but it's also not so important. But anyway, just to make sure 100% that we really have the continuous integration now working, and also so I can show you how handy it actually is, let's simply change our code once again. So what I will do now is to again get rid of this new feature. So this was really just a demonstration anyway. And also let's get rid here of some code that we don't really need. So some older code that was already commented out. This one as well. Okay. And so let's save it and let's add this code as well. So git add all and then git commit with the message of cleaned up controller, and then git push origin master. Okay, there it is. If we reload here, you see we have this latest message here. And now if we come here, let's now reload here as well. And you see that it is now building here our latest commit as well. So the cleaned up controller. Okay, and this is once again going to take some time. So I'm going to be back when this is done. And there we go. So our latest change should now be published. Let's reload. And so now this log should be gone. And yep, it is. And our application, of course, should still be working the same, right? So I am still getting my own super pizza recipe because, of course, I'm still using my same API key here. Okay, and this actually brings us to the end of this section and also to the end of the Forkify project. So it's time to say goodbye to this beautiful and big project that we built together in the last section and that we now finally deployed for the internet for everyone to see it together in this section. So make sure that for all your projects in the future, you do the same workflow as we did here. So adding them to GitHub and maybe even to a public repository so that your potential future employers can actually see that you are active on GitHub. So for some developers, and especially newbies, GitHub also kind of serves as a portfolio so that other people can see how active you actually are in coding. Okay, and that's really all that I had to tell you. And I hope that you're not yet sick of hearing my voice here. And I'm really happy that you came all the way until the end of this section here with me, so that I'm not talking alone here all by myself. But anyway, see you soon in the next section.